Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the second day of the Bhopal Literature and Art Festival. Yesterday, we had two very lively and informative sessions about wildlife conservation and civil services. Continuing with the same spirit, our session today is titled Storytelling in the Times of Crisis. For that, I'd like to hand over the stage to Ina Ross from Berlin. She is an author, museum scholar, art manager, and the lecturer at the University of Saarland and the Academy of Arts in Saarbrücken. Please note that you can ask questions to any speaker by accessing the chat room or the Q&A section. Ina, over to you.
Thank you, Anza, for this very nice introduction. Very warm welcome to all of you. Let me just say how happy I am to be back in Bhopal. On a very personal note, Bhopal was for 5 years my second home in India. I did a lot of research in this beautiful city, especially on the Tribal Museum here in Bhopal. So a shout out to my colleagues from the Tribal Museum and to all my friends here in Bhopal. I'm very happy to be here and to be part of this wonderful festival. And I'm also it's a great pleasure to have this discussion today with our panelists. And let me start this session with an introduction to our 4 panelists, which will discuss with me for the next hour our topic, storytelling in times of crisis. Let me start with Franziska Rattay. Franziska is a puppeteer and an actress. She graduated from the Academy of Performing Arts Ernst Busch in Berlin. And this academy is one of the most prestigious academies for performing arts in Europe. And this academy is a partner academy of the National School of Drama, the NSD in New Delhi. And currently she is with a very known puppeteer repertory company in Halle in Germany. And I'm also very proud to say she is a former student of mine, and I'm very happy that she could be here today and discuss with us. The second panelist is Johanna Schlegel. She is an award-winning fine artist who works especially in the field of photography and video art. She is currently with the University of Fine Arts in Offenbach, Germany, and her works are shown in galleries in public spaces all over Germany. And I also had the pleasure to work with her as a student in her time at the Academy of Fine Arts in Saarbrücken. So welcome to Johanna. The next of my panelists is Atul Bala. Atul Bala has explored the physical, historical, and political significance of water in urban environment of New Delhi through his artworks that incorporate sculpture, painting, and installation, video, photography, and performance. And I just thought, Atul, I think my very last exhibition I saw in Delhi before I left India for good was your exhibition in the Vadera Gallery. It was an outstanding show. So I'm very happy that you had the time to join us today and discuss our topic from the fine artist point of view. And last but absolutely not least is our last panelist is Amitish Gruber. He's an award-winning interdisciplinary artist. And his practice is anchored in the art and politics of performance and moves beyond theater into the visual art. Visual art and film and installation, digital art, participatory and immersive processes. His works are shown internationally in theaters, galleries, public spaces, and in the internet. And if I'm not mistaken, you also worked in Germany in the Haus der Kultur in der Welt, I think. So you are also somebody who's very internationally known. You are based in New Delhi, and we both know each other from my time when I taught at the NSD in Delhi, and Amitish was a very dear colleague of mine. So a very warm welcome to all of my panelists. I'm very excited that you are here. The topic of our session is, as I mentioned before, storytelling in times of crisis. I think the crisis doesn't need any introduction, but let me get us started with a small introduction to the whole topic and to my take on this topic. The corona crisis, and that's the crisis we are talking here, has not only jeopardized the livelihood of many artists and creative people around the world, but it has also given a rise of the debate about the value of culture and cultural work for societies as a whole. How important are the stories told by artists for the public and its health in a broader sense? Are artists expendable, or are they, to the contrary, essential workers, although in a slightly different way than nurses or bus drivers? So the panel will discuss, is the pandemic only an obstacle, a threat, something we are very much afraid of, or can it also be a source of motivation and inspiration? And that leads me to my very first question. Do you think art has to convey hope? As we all know, these are dark times and people are looking out for something that might nourish them aesthetically, mentally, spiritually. And can art be a kind of soul food in this wintry session? Should we try and tell stories of hope, hopeful stories? Or is that something that we should never be asked for the arts and the artists? Let me start with you, Atul. Should you give us hope as an artist?
I would, as you saw my last exhibition, which was titled Anadonic Dehiscence, I do not give hope.
That was before Corona.
But yeah, and that was much before Corona. That was 2018. And Anadonia, I've taken two medical terms to kind of title my exhibition. One was Anadonia, which is a beginning or the end of depression, and dehiscence is a rupture in the skin which does not heal. So I put those two words together to actually kind of convey what I wanted to convey. And but I don't see, one thing is that I don't think we can put it on the artist to kind of, okay, you give us the hope, right? It depends on each artist's individual way of working, right? And most of my work has been, a lot of people have kind of blamed me, and a lot of people don't like, some of them don't like to put my work in their rooms or in their collections, because most of it can be depressing. Right, and even though sometimes they're just plain landscapes and still lives, or just most of our work is photography, but then it does address a certain solitude, a certain loneliness, and a certain way that we look at the environment and the politics behind what goes on. So I would kind of say that I don't think we should put the onus on the artist to give us hope. It depends on each artist, how they look at the world and how they kind of express themselves. But what comes to me is also not separating what the artist is, and like you said, kind of what we do is, we are, in terms of being essential workers or not, I don't think that binary is there. What we do is extremely essential, even though we may not be essential workers. And what comes to mind is Akhmatova standing in the queue outside the Kremlin walls, and her husband and son have been taken captive by Stalin, and she goes there for years and years regularly to stand in the queue just to meet them. And obviously you don't know whether you meet them or not, but then there's somebody in the queue who recognizes her, and she says that, will you be able to address this? That addressing of the situation is extremely important for me as an artist. that she knew that the poet, and she asked the poet that, would you be able to address this, that what we are going through. And that is, I think, somewhere we all artists strive to do, whether it may be depressing or it turn out to be hope or not. But the idea is that we are essential to address the times. That's what I mean, that's what I think.
Franziska,
And,
let me, sorry.
Yeah, and no, go ahead.
No, sorry, I interrupted you.
No, and that's what I kind of, most of my work kind of addresses. It's kind of addresses a situation, and one cannot change the way one looks at the world, right? So if I look at it in a particular way and other people look at it as hope, and one can't kind of, change the way one does it. Another thing that comes to mind is that you also mentioned that, coming to the depressing part of it, that Corona and post-Corona, right? We are already hit by a bird flu in India, or if at least in Delhi, around Delhi, and the Corona has already mutated elsewhere. So I don't think we are going to get rid of the situation that we are in very easily. This is going to be a very, very long haul, that I think. And we artists and people who are in the arts need to kind of address these situations continuously, to kind of get people to kind of, know that we are there, and then these things are being addressed. So whatever we are going through.
Thank you, Atul. And I would like to continue with Franziska. Do you think the artist should give the society hope, or should you rather, like Atul emphasized, address the situation rather?
First of all, thank you for the kind introduction, and thanks to the organizers and for the invitation. I'm glad to be here. Yes, I think art itself is a wonderful way of conveying hope, and especially I'm speaking from the perspective as a puppeteer. Especially puppets have great humorous potential with their weirdness and strangeness. But in my opinion, art has no duty to convey hope only. However, what I think art should do is make viewers think critically. And I'm really not sure if we should tell more stories of hope. We shouldn't forget that even if art does not convey hope in itself, it can still be inspiring or provoking or stimulate ideas. And but yes, hope is also very important, especially in these difficult times. I'm here in Germany. In Germany, we currently have a lockdown. Schools, museums, libraries, theaters, music halls, clubs are closed, and almost everyone sits at home, and it's winter time. We literally have dark times now with long nights, and people suffer from it. Many people around me complain of being depressed or something like this. And art is often used as a therapy for depression. But the only way to currently experience art in Germany is through internet or to create art yourself. And yeah, I think that throws us back into our filter bubbles. And yeah, for me, art is a way to come into contact with other topics or stories or people or perspectives or perceptions. And I think it's very risky to close cultural institutions over a longer period of time. This takes the opportunity to get into touch with other stories or with these other topics and ideas, and view view, points of view, and yeah, to feel connected with other people. Yeah, I'm speaking from the perspective of a puppeteer. I'm not an author who sits at home alone and writes her text. In my normal everyday life, I'm in a constant contact with my colleagues and the audience, and that is a big difference to the current situation. But the prospect that better times will come soon and that we can make and see art or theater again soon, that gives hope. Yeah.
Thanks, Franziska. So we have already, artists should address the situation. They should maybe convey hope, but they should also inspire the ideas. So Johanna, what is your take on that?
I would also just agree to what Franziska and Atul said before. And I would also like to add that even if you would like to convey hope with your artwork, it is not necessarily like that the viewer will get this feeling of hope. So it's always like very individual what the art gives to the viewer. So to underline what Atul said, so I don't think that you should put an aim like to an artist, and this might not even arrive at as what he wanted or she wanted to say. But I also, like, when I listened to that, it brought me to another topic, what kind of brought hope to me when I saw art in this COVID time. And that was not the art itself, like what kind of art, but the way it came to me. Like we already said, the internet. There was a small exhibition room in Germany, which is a kind of an off space online, which is an archive showing all art exhibitions which have been influenced by Corona and have been not influenced, sorry, which have been postponed or delayed or like even cancelled. And that's a small archive of that. My school or my university, they kind of, instead of university exhibitions this year, they brought the art to the people. They showed artworks in shopping windows. They made a printed publication which was given out for free to the people. And also all these artist talks and conferences and workshops I can attend now online, being also now part of this literature and art festival. This wouldn't have been possible without the COVID-19. Like I try to see the positive things about it. Yeah, but in the long term, it's quite tiring too. But yeah, that's what I wanted to say about it also, which brought hope to me.
Amitesh, what about you?
Listening to everybody, I think I had many similar experiences as well. I do remember Bertolt Brecht's quote during difficult times, where he said that in the dark times will there be singing, and he says that yes, there will be singing about the dark times. I think the strength to sing, the strength to be able to say and express what is happening to us, no matter how hopeless or hopeful that saying is or that song is, just to be able to make a song, just to be able to make a photograph, or just to be able to write during these difficult times, in itself, I think is immensely hopeful. And I think during these times, just to be able to, keep making something, keep expressing, and also keep watching and seeing the works of many of my peers, many of my friends from around the world who were responding to these times in different ways, gave me a lot of hope. Gave me a lot of hope. I also learned to dwell in the confinement of my house this year. Um, it was a very special kind of dwelling. It was a kind of dwelling, not of the kind of solitude that as an artist I'm used to, which is where I shut my door to the world and think alone, make alone, and open the door when I'm ready to show the work. But it was a special kind of dwelling in the sense that I think when the city shut down, when the world shut down, um, my dwelling was also connected with the dwelling of everybody else, and I was constantly reading and being in touch with everybody. Um, and this is a special kind of solitude for me. It's a solitude that actually acknowledges everybody's presence. It's a solitude that acknowledged that everybody is going through this difficult time, and we are somehow together, even if we are not able to be physically together. Um, and I don't think I've experienced this kind of a profound solitude before that is at once alone and also together. So it kind of changed. I think last year kind of changed a lot of definitions for me. I also learned that there are some dreams that you need to keep only for sorrowful times. That you can't, that there are these special dreams that come to you only when there is immense sorrow and the reality is just too much to bear. Um, and it's okay for those dreams to come to you at that time. Um, and so, I think I wrote more, I shared more. Um, and I also saw that many systems that were closed had to open up, like Johanna mentioned. Um, Teaching and artistic discourse and artistic work had to open up, and I'm very glad that it did. And many of the troubles and difficulties that were there, that were somehow invisibilized by the normal world, became even more visible when the normal world stopped to operate. And I think um, that is something that is not going to go away. So all of this has become an impetus to keep making artistic work with even more ferocity now than before.
Yeah, thanks, Amitesh. I mean, listen to all of you, and also drawing from my own experience. I saw a lot of artwork recently which really addresses the coronavirus and or the conditions, or the, as Amitesh says, the solitude which comes with that. So that leads me to my next question. Is there any way the corona pandemic can be turned into a source of inspiration? In one way, source of inspiration really to create different kind of artworks, or as we already touched on, maybe as Amitish calls it, the artwork to open up for different audiences. And I would like Johanna to start with you in this round.
Just a moment, excuse me.
Yeah.
Sorry.
There are some questions, Ina. If you can
Oh.
please look at the Q&A section.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't. Oh yeah.
All the panelists, I would request you to please look at the Q&A.
Right. Can we do that after? Can we do that after our session, please? Because they are quite long questions, and I would like to read them through. But maybe we can do that on the end of our panel discussion.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, because we anyway have a Q&A session then, so let's include them there, right? Okay, Johanna, please.
Gigi. Of course, of course.
Thank you. But thanks for bringing that to my attention. Thanks, Anja.
Yeah, so to your question, source of inspiration, the pandemic, I can say for myself that it influenced me in the way I was working. Not like everything, but in some cases. For example, I do work a lot with vernacular photography. That means amateur private photographies. And usually I go into cities, into archives, into like secondhand shops to look at them. And that was not possible anymore. So I switched online. And so I could go through online archives as a source of my photographies, and that made it far easier to compare the photographies from many different like shops selling these secondhand photographies. And I did make a work out of this just because I was able to find more stuff and to compare them. And I also did write a text about my experiences about the corona pandemic, which I would have never done before, writing a text that was new for me, actually. And also I am more in contact with colleagues now. That's it helps me to stay in contact, which is kind of the opposite what people might think. And so I started cooperations. I do have an exposition room, and we do want to finally make it digitalized. So it's quite a very interesting experience to see that this changed, but in a positive way. And yeah, so that's very personal point of view.
Atul, in your work, did come something new inspired by the coronavirus or by the crisis itself came out?
I would like to say, see, one thing that the corona and the pandemic and what we're going through are now focused on is the notion of touch. I was reading somewhere that there's this woman who hadn't touched anyone for 6 or 7 months. She hadn't touched another human being. And of staying alone and all of those things. And then it brings me to material, right? And it's nice that a lot of exhibitions are happening online. One is to see a lot of online content and everything. I'm a photographer myself, and I also teach. And when I teach and what the students bring in online, I don't really see what I was supposed to see. You know, when I see a photograph printed on paper, I mean, if the work is meant to be digital, it is okay. But when it is not meant to be digital, I miss the subtleties. I cannot see the subtleties online. I just cannot. I cannot see the subtleties of drawing online. I cannot see the subtleties. I cannot feel the material online. And that is what I deeply, deeply miss. And that made me kind of go back to going back to material. I'm thinking of doing sculpture. I'm thinking of doing painting. I've gone back to drawing because I essentially become something using the lens. You know, more it was one video and photography, right? But now I have suddenly gone back to material, and this is what has happened. You may say it is inspiration, or it's a reaction to what I'm going through. It's my need to touch things again. It can be other thing. I don't know, but this is what has happened to me. And also in terms of initially I had thought, you know, when I was very happy when the lockdown happened, to be very honest, right? Because I said, okay, now I can sit back and work and be in my studio. And you wanted that solitude, and you wanted, and beyond a point, after a certain point, I lost concentration. And it is only very recently that I've got back my concentration. In terms of the concentration became erratic. I was, even for reading, it was erratic. Then I got sick of webinars because there were just too many of them, right? And you wanted to attend all of them. But then you kind of think then obviously one can choose not to attend. Then it became a FOMO, you know, fear of missing out or something, right? Oh, the art world is into something. Then you realize that it's all essentially, I mean, it's very, very few things far in between that are actually making sense to me. And what makes sense to me is getting back to my work and how I'm reacting to the situation and going back to material. Because, you know, a lot of people have said, like, what do we do? Like, even for music, I know there are music concerts happening online, right? Everyone's playing from the thing. There are curations happening online, but it's not the same thing. Right? It is just not the same thing. And you cannot replace it. See, somewhere, I mean, we may be, I don't know whether to use the word fooling ourselves to say, okay, we still exist. And they, right? So we need to do something. But for me, that existence is dependent on what happens actually in the studio. It's not dependent on what we produce just to keep the art world's wheels running.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Maybe I will end with.
At the same time, Atul, and I would like to include Amitish in that discussion. I don't know what your take is, Amitish, but I saw, especially in the performance art, a lot of new production, which really took Corona as a source of inspiration and created around this topic a lot of new works here. So I would like to, hear your opinion on that. Also, but also to give another remark, but also the ways this art forms opens up with what Franziska and I think Johanna also mentioned, new art spaces, shops get shop windows are used as stages. Concerts on balconies, you name it, everything. So I would like to hear your take on that, Amitish.
I think what the corona did to all of us was that it reminded us of our fragility.
Yes.
When come to think of it, the virus is just a few milligrams. If you collect all the virus from every lung on the planet and weigh it, it is just a few milligrams. And just a few milligrams, I mean, maybe not even that. And that 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 amount of weight, which we do not ever consider, has brought the entire mankind to its knees, and it has stopped us. And I think that is a very humbling and a very important moment for all of us to consider, not just philosophically, not just medically, but also existentially. And I think that has that inspired a lot of artists to write, a lot of poets to write about the times that we're living in. um, I do also think that I think finally the opposition between being online and being offline has been broken. We tend to think of online and offline spaces in opposition of each other, that if something is happening online, then it challenges what happens physically. I don't think that is the case anymore, because I think we are realizing that physicality and digitality are extensions of each other, um, and we are able to adapt and find different kinds of connectivities between physical and digital spaces. I also have to say that the coronavirus has been very uneven in its affect across the world. The global south experienced COVID-19 in a very different way than the global north did. Um, and that is very visible also because of all the other affects that got sort of unleashed after COVID-19 hit India, and other similar countries. Because what happened was that it was not just a medical emergency, but also a political emergency.
Mm-hmm.
It actually sort of transformed into different kinds of social and political emergencies. Um, and the medical emergency of it was only a part of the COVID-19 crisis. A lot of artists have actually been responding to that as
Mm-hmm.
well.
Interesting.
The polarization that it has caused, um, the migration crisis that took place in India, um, and also the fear that has also set in because of several sort of writers and poets and artists being threatened or facing fear for what they have been writing and for what they have been expressing. Um, and I think what is interesting about the digital space, especially in the global south, is that it does provide a different kind of liberty and freedom, which physical spaces do not. I'll give you two examples. The first, from my own work, I have been creating text for a Billboard art project for the last year and a half. And when India shut down, I didn't know what to write for this billboard because there was nobody on the streets to read it. But I decided to continue to write and decided to write in a way in which the text that I was writing was addressing an empty road where nobody was reading it, nobody was seeing it. And it was important for me to do it, to continue writing for that board, because it had become a ritual for me to keep sending out a message, to keep trying to reach out in one way or another. And the second project that I made was a project of cyber theater, where I invited performers and programmers and coders and scenographers to imagine a world online in which the audiences could immerse themselves and engage with live performances, find different ways to interact, and to also make these interactions a reflection of the time that we're living in. And I think that for me became an extremely important part of last year, to be able to process what was happening to us.
Franziska, would like to hear your take on that. Thanks, Amitish.
Yeah, I agree with Amitesh. Art is somehow always a mirror of current events. And yeah, at the moment I am experiencing renunciation, boredom, or loneliness. And Not macht erfinderisch. Necessity is the mother of invention. So at the moment, my source of inspiration is mainly the internet. I mainly perceive the world through a screen, and that also influences the way I and many other artists create art. So I had to find ways to bring my analog puppetry into digital media. During the first lockdown here in Germany, I made some, for example, I made some short clips with puppets for social media. I recorded good night stories, me as a moon, or I gave relationship tips in times of Corona for singles or couples with help of a hand puppet. And or with a cat puppet, I sang a sad song about boring life and on my sofa. Yeah, but on the other hand, I see that the increased dealing with news and the vigilant and the observation of political events has led to art becoming more and more political. One political phenomenon in times of crisis are conspiracy theories. And I think this is really a new form of telling stories. Yeah, and so during the second lockdown, I made a piece about conspiracy theories for theater live streams. All theater are doing live streams now, and this is also a new thing. And this piece was about a company. Those air mattresses are no longer being bought by customers, so they decided to create their own conspiracy theory to sell the products. Sorry. Yeah, and the conspiracy theory of the play was that so much plastic floats in the oceans that there are already entire islands of plastic, and these plastic islands should soon be habitable, but that's top secret, and because only the rich elite will be settled there. So everyone needs an air mattress that finds a way on its own to that island. So that was my way to look on the topic of conspiracy theory. Yeah.
Conspiracy theory as a new form of storytelling. That sounds like a new panel discussion. We should follow the topic very soon. But let me come to my last question, and it touches a little bit on that what Amitesh already said in his last remark, that this corona has changed or has kind of triggered a lot of crisis on top of this pandemic, but also has changed our view of many things. So my last question is about, there is a debate going on about whether after Corona or post-Corona, we will return to be our old normal, or our world will be changed for good, having undergone some great reset. From your point of view, the point of view of the arts, how do you think the situation, once the virus is defeated, will be different from what we knew before? So Amitesh gave already some hints, like the digital space and the physical space, this divide is over. Now we conceive that very differently. But what other aspects do you think will change for good? Or are we going back to our old normal and just consider Corona as a short-term nightmare, which we all try to forget very soon? I think, Atul, I expect you to have a little bit different view on that. Atul, your microphone is out. Sorry, we can't hear you. Okay,
sorry. Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yes.
No, I'm the pessimist here.
I'm surprised, but I have to say, yes, you are.
Now, see, the thing is, I don't think the corona is really going away. Like, so if you look at the virus and you look at the vaccine, you will probably need continuous jabs till you, and then we already have, like I said, it is already mutated, and now we already have a bird flu, at least within the North India, if I'm not mistaken, within the area of Delhi. So, but I just think that the way it's connected to my work in the sense that a lot of my work deals with water, the environment, and how we kind of treat, how we kind of live. And I hope that we learn from what is going on. But what comes to me is that in a crisis is Primo Levi. And because of, in his book, if this is a man, because he describes how people behave in a crisis within the concentration camp, right? And then it is, you just want to save your own self. And very few people actually help others, right? So it's one of these things. And I think that I don't think we are really going to learn. Capitalism will find a way to kind of creep through, and we'll have to continuously resist what we have been resisting. We will have to find new ways that, to resist the onslaught of the capitalist agenda that we find, especially within the subcontinent, especially within India and elsewhere. Right? Even though we may have hope, we may see hope around the corner, etc. But I don't think so, because most of it is we have kind of brought it on ourselves, and we are so comfortable I mean, there has to be something else has to. I mean, things. I don't want to say things have to get worse, right? But the thing is that I don't think we've changed. We've just adapted. The human being has been so adapted that we just adapted ourselves to the situation. Like if I talk of the art world, right? So the art world had adapted itself to the situation. There are online sales going on. There are online seminars going on, webinars going on, everything going on. So what I mentioned earlier, at the wheel of the art world continues to move. But has it really changed the way we are looking at the world? Right. So, so business of the art world continues. But what has the artist? Are we looking at, or what are we selling, and what is being going on? How are the artists looking at it, and how are the art institutions helping out? I would just like to also point out that in India, I mean, very few institutions actually came out and helped artists. I myself signed a petition for the Lankara Academy to kind of help out artists in these times. There has been no major kind of help for younger artists, especially. I'm not saying helping other artists, but artists who were living off their art and everything. There have been small, efforts in that direction. And I know the performing arts also were doing something, and within the visual arts, people were wanting to help each other, but then it all fizzled out, right? But then what about long term? So the thing is that initial responses are okay, they were very good, but what about sustainability of the responses for long term? Because I don't see the corona ending very soon, even though we are very happy that the vaccine is there, but we still don't know what the vaccine can bring and how many of us are going to get it. We may not get it by the end of next year or something like that. So all those things kind of bring me, again, even though I am hopeful that we will find ways, but the thing is, the response that the world has, or the art world has been very small, especially within the subcontinent, especially within India. There have been people helping each other. There have been artists buying others' work, but there are very few. How does one survive? What about the major institutions and art fairs, biennales? All of them had money. Everything got cancelled, right? But there was still money. Could that money be used in supporting younger artists or artist projects? Could that be used that way? But I don't think it has been used. If I'm not, somebody should correct me if I'm wrong. But major museums, major private collectors, I wish, I don't know that they have, but I wish they would come out and support younger artists who want to make their mark or want to become artists, to support them with certain stipends and with certain other things that to continue. Some of the residencies were cancelled rather than have virtual residencies. Some people did continue with virtual residencies. Certain amounts were paid as virtual residencies that you could keep. You don't have to travel, but we'll send you the money to actually make work where you are. But a lot of other people cancel residencies. Now, canceling residency means that obviously you are not visible, that you will not be there. So you do not play a part in the making the art world market spin. So again, it becomes a market that we are looking at again. So can we think of way of supporting each other as artists, as to somewhere bring into way of this? I don't see that happening. I mean, the initial responses are all okay, right? The Delhi Art Fair, the India Art Fair is I think is going to be online. The Kochi Biennale was postponed to next year. I think the student Biennale is happening, but it is happening online, right? And in February, and but the usual fanfare and parties and the money that was spent during the art fair in Delhi, would that be spent on younger artists? That is my question. So I don't see that happening. So that is why I kind of look at, I don't know whether I've digressed from the question or not, but that's.
So you are, let me say, you are a hopeful pessimist, but what you are addressing here is, and I think that it's slightly different here in Germany, because we had a kind of discussion in the society, and we recognized the artists as maybe not as essential workers, but as at least a profession which needs support in times of the crisis, in times of pandemic, because of all that, what you just mentioned, canceling of fires and all that. So the government gave support to the artists here. So, but that is a social consent that we think the art, the artist, and the stories the artist tells are so important to our society that we would like to spend money. So we didn't rely on the art market because, as you already told us, and I couldn't agree more, the art market will never have this kind of solidarity you need in terms of crisis, right? But let us come to the question, are we going back to normal after the crisis, or is the world changed for good?
I think,
yeah,
I don't,
please.
You want me to, sorry.
Yeah, please, please.
I don't think the world, I think the world not going back to normal. The world will change considerably, and we'll be looking at things differently. And what Amitish said, and Johanna and Francesca, and do. But the thing is, between being hopeful and feeling dejected, I think we'll be kind of oscillating between these two, and I think it'll be hugely changed. I mean, one way is that the art world may address these things, but I don't think we have learned from what is going on. I mean, I maybe sound very, very pessimistic in this, but I don't think we've learned, at least how I see and what I see around me, especially within India, I don't think we have learned enough. We are going to fall into the same trap again in another 5 years, 7 years, or 10 years. So I don't think we have learned enough.
Okay, Francesca, what is your take from your point of view?
Yeah, I agree with that. And stories we tell are mostly stories about relations, and Corona has influenced our personal relationships in a way we didn't know before. So I do think that there's a strong desire in people for the good old normal, but I also think we can't just go back there. During Corona, we had the experience of being able to access a large number of artistic and cultural offers comfortably from home, like this festival program here. And yeah, I believe this expectation of art will partly remain. And yeah, in 2020, we mainly perceived the world and our society through screens, and this view of the world is unlikely to change anytime soon, I guess. Yeah, because we have now made the experience that the internet is a safe source for our contacts or culture or our art or political debates. Therefore, in the future, even more attention will be paid to ensuring that art is Instagrammable or can be otherwise also be experienced digitally. And yeah, because who knows when the next pandemic will come. But I still think that live formats such as theater, concerts, or festival events do not lose their appeal. I think these are exactly things that we humans miss sorely, and that reminds us of better times.
So we go partly back to the normal in terms of our old formats like Biennale, like festivals, but at the same time, if I understood you right, there is a certain dynamic in the digital space, which is due to Corona. Johanna, what do you think about that?
I also agree with this pessimistic view, sorry.
Yeah, we're all pessimists here. I'm looking forward to Amitesh.
I would also underline and say Atul was right with saying it's not the last pandemic. I wouldn't have thought I would ever cite the Bible, but in the 10 plagues of Egypt, 2 out of them were epidemics. And so we just in the last 100 years, we forgot about the Spanish flu. We were like medically really in a good place to be able to forget about it, but apparently now it comes back, and I do think it's not the last one. So first thing. And also, I don't think we did learn enough, like Atul already said. And it does take a lot of power and a lot of imaginary thinking to renew the world, so that we didn't come here yet. I think we were too, I don't know, it rolled over us like a wave, and we didn't me neither, I didn't really come back standing and inventing new things. So I think we could be far further right now. And then I also always
Dear
have this
panelists, excuse me, dear panelists, I'm really sorry to interrupt, but I would like to remind remind everyone that we only have 5 minutes left questions and answers from the. I'm sorry once again. Please continue.
No
Yeah, I'll
problem.
make it short. So always this thing of an old normal. I have really a problem with this way of saying and thinking, because the world always turns and everything changes all the time. So actually it's a false friend of thinking about an old normal. We will never, it's always changing. Anything, even without a pandemic, we won't be able to come back to an old normal. And last thing I would like to add is that the politicians in Germany do underline all the time that this hope that old things come back, like this old normal will come back. It gives a hope to the people, which in my opinion is kind of false. And that's also why we will come back to a sort of old normal, like Francisca said.
But is the old normal so desirable, actually? Amitish, help us out with some hopeful last remarks, please.
I'll make it very short. I think it is the artist's job to resist going back to normal. If the world goes back to normal, we have to be the obstacle. We have to be the impediment. We have to resist. And we have to keep the memory of what we have learned from this pandemic. Because I think this pandemic, like Arundhati Roy beautifully put in her article very early on in the pandemic in India, was that this pandemic is actually a portal. It's a portal not just of time, but of sociality. It's a portal of uh, sort of, it's an opportunity that we have been given to look at all the heavy things that we're carrying with us till now, and to shed them, to address them, to process them, and to walk with a kind of lightness through this portal to the other side, whatever that other side might be. So I think our job is to really sort of take this pandemic as a portal, as a thought experiment. Um, and the oil prices dropped to negative globally. The oil companies were paying their customers to pick up oil rather than being paid for it. This was a historical moment for us. And so I think a lot of how the globe has learned to construct the normal got overturned. And it is this overturned world that we need to maintain for some time longer. I think we need to wait, we need to hold it, we need to be patient with this turmoil, because this turmoil is teaching us a lot of things. So resist the normal, number one. The other is that after every crisis, the world does return to art, whether it is the Spanish flu or the World War II. Look at how the museums, look at how the art world got revived after the world wars took place, especially in Europe. Um, the same is true of the post-independent Indian and South Asian art world as well. That there was a revival, that people actually returned to art with much more fervor, with much more desperation, because art then becomes the memory keepers of the world. You know, artists are the conscience keepers, and art becomes the memory keeper. So I also do think that it's society's responsibility to show up for art. It is their responsibility to witness art, and I think people who, audiences, viewers, society at large, has to own up to this responsibility as well, to show up, to continue to watch, read, to engage with art and with artists, because as an artist, I know I love to be engaged with. And that engagement has actually gone up in the last year. So on that
On
note
this
of
very
hope,
hopeful note. Thanks, Amitesh. And let me wrap up our session, first of all, to thank our panelists, Franziska, Johanna, Atul, and Amitesh, for the very interesting contribution and very interesting insights to the topic. I think we touched on a very broad topic in this hour, and we had very different aspects of it. And we have discussed some pessimistic point of views. We have also discussed the optimistic, the dynamics which maybe lie in this crisis. And I would like to open up now our discussion to our audiences. We have a Q&A session, and as Ansar told me, there are some written questions already in the F&A section, but maybe the pardon?
Ina, I'm really
Yes.
sorry, but we don't have time for
I'm
the
sorry.
questions anymore.
Oh, but
Yes,
okay. All right.
we have another session lined up, so please wrap up the session.
Okay. If that is the case, then let me just say again, thank you so much to our panelists. Thanks for hosting us here in Bhopal. It was a very privilege to be here and to speak to you all here. And thanks also to our listeners. And I hope we see each other again in a physical space the next time. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
thank you. This was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Ina, for the lovely session. And we're very happy to have you with us and all your entire team. Thank you. Over to you, Raghavji.
Thank you very much, Ina. Thank you, Atul. Thank you, Franziska, Johanna, and Amitesh. It was a delightful session. Some of the questions that were raised have not been answered, but I'm sure we could pass on the emails of Ina and the other panelists, and I'm sure they would oblige by reverting back and answering your queries online. So once again, thank you very much. It's been a delightful session.
Thanks, Mr. Chandra.
Very, very interesting. And
Thank
lends
you.
lots of interesting perspectives to the subject of art. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye. Bye to Bhopal. Bye.
I'd like to thank all our panelists for this lovely session. Moving on to our next session titled The Art of Storytelling with novelist Kunal Basu. He will be joined by authors Atima Mankotia and Sumit Malik. Please note that you can ask questions to any speaker by accessing the chat room and the Q&A section.
Welcome, Kunal. Welcome to the Bhopal Literature Festival. We've all read your literature, your novels. We're absolutely delighted to know of how you've been able to convert and written stuff which has been picked up by cinema. And welcome, Shumit. Welcome, Fatima. We look forward to a very, very interesting and joyful session.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Raghav. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to this year's Bhopal Literature Festival in virtual mode. In this session, we will discuss the art of storytelling through the renowned author, Kunal Basu's books. And with me is my co-panelist, Sumit Malik. Sumit Malik is an Indian Administrative Service officer who spent his formative years in the city of Calcutta, which appears a lot in Kunal's writings. Sumit relocated to Mumbai after entering the service, and he's also an author and has written 3 books. And now let me introduce you to the author of the day, Kunal Basu, who teaches at Oxford University's Syed Business School. He has written 5 novels in English, the most recent one being Sarojini's Mother, published in the year 2020. He has also written a collection of short stories called The Japanese Wife, and this title story has been made into a film by filmmaker Aparna Sen. He has also written 4 novels in Bengali. So welcome Sumit and Kunal to this session.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So let me now begin this discussion on the art of storytelling through Kunal Basu's books. And my first question to Kunal is, why did you choose historical fiction as a genre for storytelling? Do you think it's this genre that supports the stories that you want to tell? Or do you believe that it is a better or rather a superior form of storytelling as compared to other genres?
Well, thank you for having me. Look, I'm not a historian, and the starting point for my writing is never a genre. The starting point for my writing is a story that somehow, in perhaps strange ways, comes into my mind. And if that story is located at a particular historical juncture, a different time, a different location than the present, then it becomes historical fiction. But if it is located in the present time, in specific locations that I'm familiar with and the reader might be familiar with, it becomes a contemporary novel. So in my mind, there is no comparison. I love them all. I like to write historical novels. I've written contemporary novels. I've written novels that are set in theaters of war in the Middle East, and so on and so forth. So to answer your question, for me, the story is paramount. And what appears in my mind, perhaps I should give you an example to make this a bit more concrete. So if you think about my first novel, The Opium Clerk, which was published in 2001, about 20 years ago, is a historical novel, and it is set in the world of the British opium trade and involves Calcutta, Canton, and Kuching in Malaya. How did I think of this story? Well, several years ago, I was trekking in the border between Thailand and Laos. Okay, and one evening, while I was, waiting for the next day's trekking, my trekking guide lent me a book on heroin trafficking in the Golden Triangle region. Now, this is a subject that never excited me. Okay, I was never drawn to this particular trade or this particular phenomenon. But I was bored. So I sat and I started turning pages of this book. And there was a line in that book which said, in the 19th century, Calcutta was the world center for illegal drug trade. And I said, this can't be true. I was born and reared in Kolkata. I'm a thoroughbred Kolkatan. I've never read it in any history book. Okay. And this was, ways back. And so I went back to my university after the trip, and I went to the library and I started reading. What was this thing about opium trade and why Calcutta? And indeed, it was true. And as I started reading, a story started taking shape in my mind. Okay, a story which involved addicts and traders, the Europeans, the Indians, the Parsis, the Chinese, the Malays, and the novel was born. If it hadn't been for that particular trekking expedition, my first novel might have turned out not to be a piece of historical fiction, but something else.
Kunal, many of your books are based in Calcutta, the city to which you originally belong. Books like The Opium Clerk, Calcutta, and your most recent book, Sarojini's Mother. Tell us how and why you weave the city of Kolkata into your storytelling, and also how Bengali novelists like Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, Ramesh Chandra Datta, and Sharadindu Bandyopadhyay, how have they influenced your writing?
Very good question. Look, let me start with the latter and then I'll come to the former, if I may. Bankim Chandra has been my perennial favorite. one of the most complete novelists, not simply Bengal has produced or India has produced, but the world has produced. Okay, as well as Ramesh Chandra Datto, Sharadindu, etc. And I've grown up reading all of this, and they have fed that particular stream of historical curiosity in me. I often say this, that I'm a failed historian. I should have studied history in university. I ended up studying other things. And the early reading of authors like Bankim Chandra and others that you've mentioned really fostered a kind of deep-seated historical romance that many Bengali children grow up with. And they therefore certainly influenced that particular stream of writing in me. Look, as far as Kolkata is concerned, by the way, Atima, I have 8 novels in English, 4 in Bangla, and a collection of short stories, not 5 novels in English. And most of my writing, in English at least, is not contextualized in Kolkata. The Opium Clerk, one section is certainly 19th century Kolkata. Kolkata is very much the city, and Sarojini's mother is in the city. Okay, but in the interim, the miniaturist, races, Yellow Emperor's Cure, they're all set outside, and some even outside of India. But to return to your question, Shumit, as an author, I tend to see, or I wish to see this city as an outsider insider or an insider outsider. What do I mean by that? You see, the insider is privy to a lot, has lots of information, has lots of experience in the city. And what happens is when you have a lot of experience about something, you miss the essential details. You don't notice. Okay. The road that you take to work every day, you're so familiar with it that you almost would not notice the peculiarities and the specialties of the journey. The outsider would. Now, the outsider who knows nothing about Kolkata will likely make assumptions that are not appropriate, or will draw conclusions that are not borne out by that context. Okay, both of these positions to me as a writer are problematic. So I come from a domain sort of in between. Okay, I know a bit, but I want to explore more. Take Sarojini's mother. In writing that novel, I went back to parts of Kolkata that I know very well, but I wanted to discover with fresh eyes. I took the number 39 tram from Khilirpur to Dalhousie. Now, I've taken this tram as a student many, many times, as a young person. But I wanted to experience and determine what is it that I see now in that journey. So again, a sort of long-winded answer to your question, Shumit, is I want to surprise myself with Kolkata, and I want to surprise my readers with Kolkata every time that city makes its presence felt in my novels.
No, I agree with you there, because I also am from Calcutta. So Calcutta always throws up surprises, which I never realized earlier each time I visit that city. Now, for my next question, during a recent interview, you have spoken about your obsession with the act of searching, which has remained with you throughout your literary career. A search for a perfect tone in a novel, the perfect form of narrative, the perfect configuration of characters. In your novel, Sarojini's Mother, this eternal search seems to have taken center stage as the principal subject. So tell us more about Sarojini Mother and how the story germinated and took shape in your mind and then in your novel.
Okay. I studied in the US, and many, many years ago, actually decades ago, when I used to fly from Kolkata to New York, I distinctly remember on Air India those days, I would notice that many of the seats of that aircraft would be filled with newborns, with a nurse accompanying them. And of course, these little infants cried throughout the journey. And everybody said, oh my God, I mean, when will the children shut up? Okay. So it piqued my curiosity. And I'm talking about the 70s. So I would ask this nurse, where are you taking these kids? Who are they? And she would say, look, they're kids that they're orphans who have been put up for adoption. They've been adopted by parents by couples in Europe or in America. And I'm a nurse, I'm taking them to their destination. I'm reaching them to their adoptive parents. Okay. And even way back then, when I had no interest in writing novels, I would often think, now, what's going to happen years later when these kids grow up into young men and women, and some of them would want to make the journey back? What would that journey, that return journey be like? What would they be searching for? Now, as you know, these adoptees coming back to India to look for their parents is not a news story anymore. Okay, you read in newspapers of people coming back and trying to find their mothers, their lost parents, and so on and so forth. The thought that struck me years later and recently when I was writing Sarojini's Mother was, look, the easy solution is if a returnee, after a lot of toil, finds his or her birth mother. It's a happy ending story. It's a Hollywoodish story. It didn't satisfy me. Or it can be a heartbreak story, that the person comes and searches and searches and searches, but never finds the adoptive mother. Okay, it's a heartbreak story. It's not interesting for me to write. But what if she found not one, but two mothers? What if there was enough circumstantial evidence? And in India, we know information and birth records are incredibly problematic, especially going back some decades. What if she finds evidence for two mothers? And she is caught in between. Could this person be my mom? Could that person be my mom? And through this dilemma, through this search, this dilemma of the search, can we explore the true nature of motherhood? What is Sarojini searching for? Is she searching for a biological anchor? That's it. Is she looking for a kind of deep inner connection? And is it possible to find that deep inner connection after decades? Okay. And so that's sort of the essence of the story, is through the vehicle of this search, I was actually trying to explore a deeper search, is what is really the notion of motherhood to us individuals?
So taking this question forward, you have explored relationships, especially motherhood and the various nuances of motherhood in your recent book, which is one book we'll talk about because it's most recent. You have also discarded the notion of this unquestioning love between mother and child. And you've actually written about the complexity of relationship and the manipulation between a mother and child. According to you, do you think relationships are a very important part of storytelling? And which relationships, according to you, hold the most appeal for readers? So we know that, romance sells a lot, romantic relationships between men and women, mother and child, father and child, friendships. According to you, which relationships are most essential to storytelling?
All of the above. All of the above. Okay. All relationships, if they are engaged in a heartfelt way, if they're meaningful, then they exercise the heart and they exercise the mind. And nothing is more important than an author than to actually explore nature of relationships in a novel. After all, what is a novel? A novel really is a story of what? A story of human beings interacting, exchanging with each other, some with joy and some with a lot of pain. Okay. And if you think about all the famous novels written in every language of this world, what do we remember about them? We remember characters and the relationships that they've had with their significant others. And it can be really anything. The Japanese Wife, my short story, was a romantic relationship between an Indian man and a Japanese woman. Okay. I've explored that. In a Bengali novel that I've written recently and which has been translated into English called The End Game, I explored the relationship between two women who were strangers to begin with, and they became friends. Friendship between two women. Okay. In Sarojini's Mother, it is between a young woman and her presumptive mother. Okay. So all our novels, all our stories are essentially about, if you look at the great masters like Rabindranath in Bengali, or if you look at Bankim Chandra, is placing the notion of relationships in context that which may be familiar to us or which may be not so familiar to us.
So talking about your your short story, A Japanese Wife, which was adapted on the celluloid by renowned filmmaker Aparna Sen. How was the experience of your story being converted into a movie? Do you think that movies do justice to stories that people write? Or do you think some of the essence of the story gets lost in translation when it is actually converted into a movie, which is much shorter, of course?
These are two different art forms. Okay. And when Aparna approached me for the rights of The Japanese Wife, she asked me if I would write the screenplay. I said, no. Okay. I don't want to write the screenplay because I have exhausted all the passion I had about this story in writing it. Now it's up to you to take it forward with your passion. Now, I was incredibly lucky with The Japanese Wife. Lucky because in this instance, the director, Aparna, and myself, we shared a similar sensibility about the story. Okay, she saw the story in a similar light to mine. She saw the emotional evolution of the characters very similar to mine. So I was not disappointed by the result. I loved the result. Now, in some instances, when an author sells a story to a filmmaker, the filmmaker may have her or his own take on the story, which can turn out to be very different. And that may lead to a lot of divergence between the story and the film. I don't know whether you know, there was this major controversy between Satyajit Ray and Sunil Gangopadhyay. Satyajit Ray made a film called Aranye Din Ratri, which was made on a story written by Sunil Gangopadhyay. When the film, which was a very successful film, came out, Sunil Gangopadhyay, great Bengali novelist, wrote in newspapers and said, "This is not my story. I know something completely different." Okay. And Satyajit Ray said, "Well, I've interpreted your story in this way." So that went on for a while. Okay. But what I've come to realize is that we authors, once we have finished a story or a novel, it no longer belongs to us. It belongs to the reader. It belongs to the filmmaker. It has often happened to me that somebody would come up to me and say, "Oh, I've read this novel of yours. And this novel was about this theme." And I've scratched my head and say, "Oh, really? I hadn't thought of that while writing this novel." Which means the author, the reader, has actually interpreted this novel, the story, in her or his own way. And that is absolutely appropriate. A completed book does not belong to the author. It belongs to the reader, and if it's sold as a film, it belongs to the filmmaker.
So adding to this, have you read a book and a movie, and what satisfies you more? I mean, a book or a movie? After you read a book and do you see a movie, mostly I am very disappointed, in the movie. But what about you? Do you think there's been a movie that has actually done full justice to a book?
I hate to use the word justice, because what that means is that fidelity to the novel is what would make the movie successful or liked by me. It doesn't have to be. They're two different expressions, artistic expressions, drawing from the same fountain, so to speak. I'll give an example. I watched the film English Patient before I read English Patient by Michael Ondaatje. I know Michael and Michael Ondaatje's writing. I'm very fond of his writing. But I watched the film before and I enjoyed the film. I liked the film. Okay. But when I later read the novel, I was equally intrigued. There's a lot in the film, in the novel, which is not in the film. Okay. But I didn't interpret that as a problem of lack of fidelity. Okay. I saw two creative minds, one the author and one the other the director, both of them sort of taking off and creating their own works. Now, notice, it can be a bad director can completely hash up a film, a story. Okay, and if that happened to me, I would be very upset.
Okay. Do you have any example in which you think the movie was better than the book?
The movie better than the book? I mean, better in the sense that I've liked it better.
Yes.
Yeah, better is a relative judgment. There's nothing absolute in the domain of the arts. I mean, I may think something is good and you may not. Hard pressed. I can give you examples in the obverse. Let me give you the example in the obverse because it's top of the mind for me. a novel which I like a lot is Gabriel Garcia Marquez's Love in the Times of Cholera. Okay, I love it. Okay, but when while Marquez was alive, he was recalcitrant giving the rights of this novel, okay, to a filmmaker, as he was recalcitrant giving the rights of 100 Years of Solitude for film rights. Okay, he had given film rights to many of his short stories. He was not opposed to films being made out of his work. But when I watched the film Love in the Times of Cholera, I was so disappointed because the novel is a hot Latin novel, sensual, full of nuances, full of life. Okay, whereas the film that came out of it was cold and hard and stilted. Okay, so that's an example of not the one that you asked for, but in the reverse. Have I seen a film which I liked a lot? I wouldn't say better, but is Nostoni, which is a very famous novel by Rabindranath Tagore, was made into a film by Satyajit Ray, as we know. Okay, I actually think that the film explored the nuances of that relationship, the very troubled relationship between husband and wife, in a very significant way. I wouldn't call it better, but I would be hard pressed to decide which one of these appeal to me more.
Thanks. Now for the next question. In a very unique book, you have collaborated with photographer Kushal Ray for the book called Intimacies, which contains no less than 8,000 photographs, and all of them have been shot in a 12-room house with 10 residents who have sort of lost out in the rat race and have given up on success. Telling stories through photographs is another area that you have explored. Your narrative brings to life the remarkable world of the photographer and the photographed. Tell us how this book came into being, and how was your experience of telling stories through the medium of photographs?
I'm very happy, Shumiti, brought this up, because in most interviews or more conversations I have with my books, intimacies hardly ever gets mentioned. And I'm very happy that you brought it up. It came about in a strange way. The publisher of this book approached me and said, would I write, they're going to publish a collection of photographs. Would I write a foreword for that? I said, no, I don't do these things. I don't write forewords. Okay. And all I write are, in my mind, substantial pieces of work, literary works. I don't write forewords and things like that. And he said, but take a look at these photographs. Why don't you take a look at these photographs? Now, I like photography. I've done photography myself. And so I have to say that I was curious. And I was also between two books. Okay. Now, this is a very interesting phase in a writer's life, especially in my life. Okay. You've written books as well. When you finish the book and you think you want to write another book, for me, I need a palate cleanser. I need to move away from that previous book substantially in order to write the next one. Otherwise, I would be carrying over the voice, the tonality, the methodology of the previous book into this new book. And that may or may not be appropriate. So I was saying, well, what should I write? Maybe I should do something else, but what should it be? Let me at least look at the photographs. So when I saw these photographs, I was actually quite struck. Not simply because they were shot inside, these are not pretty photographs. They're not pretty photographs, okay? And they're like cinema verite. So they're very realistic scenes of life in a lower middle class Bengali household and things like that. But what struck me was the relationship between this young photographer and this elderly lady, 18 years older than him, who was his muse, okay? So can you imagine, in a lower middle class household on the rooftops, this college lecturer lady, lecturer of philosophy, and a much younger man who's not related to her, would be spending the whole evening talking about the great photographers of this world. What an amazing thing that is. What an unusual thing that is. And when she was struck by lung cancer, this young photographer becomes her caregiver. Okay. And she tells him all through the process, keep photographing me, keep photographing me, keep photographing me, till the very end when she passed away. When he couldn't hold up the camera in his hand because he was so distressed. He says, no, photograph me. Okay. So when I heard this, and when Kushal, the photographer, came over, I sat him down and I said, I will not write a foreword because I don't write forewords, but I'll write 7 short pieces, each of them a short story, almost a short story, which in a creative nonfiction way describes, lays out, explores this strange relationship and this strange set of photographs. So that's how Intimacies came about.
Yeah.
So, I want to go back to your novels. You have picked up subjects which are so fascinating. Things like The Miniaturist and The Racist. I haven't read that one. But, how do these ideas come about? How did you think of Racist and how did you think of Miniaturist? How did you, develop these stories? Because they are very different from the run of the mill standard stories we read. So, very fascinating kind of subject. So, could you talk about those a bit?
Yeah, I mean, the most difficult question for me to answer, is how did I think of a story? The easier question for me to answer is how did I go about writing that story? How did I research? What was my method? What did I try to find out? And so on and so forth. Okay. What were my reference points? I'm an academic in my other life, so I understand method. Okay. And it's easier to explain. One can be articulate about that. The most difficult question for me to answer is why did I think of that story? And sometimes the answer is obvious to me, and sometimes the answer is not obvious to me. So let me give you the example of The Miniaturist, which is a story that completely took me by surprise. So after The Opium Clerk, which came out in 2001, I was not thinking of writing The Miniaturist. I was thinking of writing a novel about Subhash Chandra Bose, a completely fictitious novel about this man journeying on a submarine from Germany to Singapore. Okay. And then he gets lost and the crash or the crash and disappearance, and all about that. And I was trying to write almost a thriller where 2 individuals, a crazy professor and a friend, they go to the Soviet Union and they go into the archives to find out the truth about Netaji. So I started my research, I was reading up books and doing all of that stuff that I do. And the year was 1999. And it was the 31st of December, so Millennium Eve. I was in London with my wife and our daughter. And it was a fun night. A lot of people were walking around Piccadilly Circus and Trafalgar Square, bottles of champagne in their hand, and they're wishing each other Happy New Year, Happy New Millennium. And it was, while the world was welcoming the 21st century, my mind, strangely, was going back to the Middle Ages, to Central Asia, to mosques, to minarets, to vast deserts. Okay? And I was saying, why am I thinking about these things? And suddenly the story of an artist, a child prodigy, born in the reign of Akbar, okay, came into my mind. As I was walking around, remember I'm walking around central London, wishing everybody else in a completely different scenario. The story of The Miniaturist was forming in my mind. A child prodigy, a genius. Everybody expects that person to become a superstar artist. Akbar's chief artist of the Kitab Khana. Akbar's chief artist in Fatehpur Sikri. Okay? And then something terrible happens to him. And he disappears from sight. What happened to him? Okay? And when I thought of this story, it wouldn't let go of me. There was no reason in the immediate present for me to think about the story of The Miniaturist, but it came to my mind, which tells you what a strange thing the human mind is. And the next morning I said, enough of Subhash Bose. I'm not going to write that novel. I'm now going to write the novel of the Mughal artist, and started my own method of writing that novel. It's a difficult question to answer. I mean, if I wish I knew my mind. We think we know our minds, but we don't.
And The Racist? I mean, that's really fascinating, and maybe I haven't read it, but it might be pretty relevant in today's context of what's happening.
It's my most controversial novel in the United Kingdom. I have to say this. So when it came out in the UK first, and then later in America and India and so forth, In the first 2 weeks, there were 14 reviews of this novel, the mainstream in England, in Ireland, and Scotland. Okay, about 50% of the reviews said very good things about it, which pleased me. 50% of the reviews were condemnatory of the book, saying that why is the author writing about this discredited racial theories? There is no racism in the world. Okay, there's no racism in the world. Okay, the Telegraph, the Financial Times, okay, said, why is he corrupting the minds of young readers with these sorts of racial ideas? You know, craniology and all of that, racial superiority. And 50% of the reviewers, the Guardian, the Independent, and the other says, very good book, fantastic novel. Okay. You know, England is a strange place. I've studied in the US, lived in Canada for 13 years, and in Oxford for the last 21. As I've said in other places, in the US, racism is a graffiti. In England, racism is a fine art. Okay. In other words, it's subtle, it's nuanced, it's there, but it's never on your face. Okay. And if you live there, rather than if you're not a tourist, but if you live there, especially if you're in institutions, me as an institution in Oxford for 21 years, you see the running theme of racism. And the running theme of racism is validated by what was considered to be 19th century science of human diversity. Because in the 19th century biology, it was believed, it was legitimately, academically, from a research point of view, believed that there was a hierarchy of races. Some races were superior, some were not. PhD theses, doctoral theses were conducted in London, Oxford, Heidelberg, Cambridge, Geneva, okay, categorizing the skulls of human beings. This was not pseudoscience, but science. Like with genetics today, there was craniology then. And the perception, the feeling, the sentiment got into the minds of everybody, not just scientists, that there is something called racial superiority. And the European is on the top, the African is at the bottom. And we Indians really didn't feature much. We were sort of middle of the tier and so on and so forth, based on the skull characteristics. Okay. So in England, faced with this subtle fine art of racism, my expression or my journey to understand it, Racist is a novel that I wrote for myself, that I was trying to understand, what is it? Why is it that race is so important? Why is it that for human beings, similarity is so important? Okay. In some cases, it may be race, as in my novel. It could be religion. Why do people of one religion gravitate towards people of that religion? Why is similarity such a powerful driving force in human judgment? Why do Bengalis gravitate towards Bengalis? Okay. Why this notion of similarity? And so it was intriguing. I don't think I have the answer. But as a novelist, my job is not to find the answer, but to explore the domain, which is what I tried to do through Racists.
So very
Kunal, your
interesting.
books, sorry.
No, go
Kunal,
ahead.
your books are very diverse in the plots and the settings, etc. But is there any central message in your books that you'd like the reader to take away? I mean, do you have any particular philosophy in which you're trying to say something to the readers to somehow make this world into a better place, bring about a paradigm shift in thinking? You know, like authors in the past have done, like Dickens or Steinbeck, etc., Orwell.
Yeah. Not conscious is the short answer. I don't have a pet theory or an ideology which I'm trotting out in different garbs. I'm not doing that. The diversity comes from in the contexts of my novels and different settings of my novels, comes from my wildering imagination and because I've wandered through the world and not simply just geographically, but in different spaces and inhabited different worlds in many ways. I'm not consciously trying to suggest something which readers should take away as a collected part of my writing. So I've been asked this question before and asked this question before by those who are interested in literary criticism. I have you will pardon me for saying this, I have a very glib answer to that, which I'm not going to use here. Somebody said, well, I said, look, God should not play the theologist. Okay, let theologists figure out what God is about. God shouldn't play the theologist. Okay, but that aside, I think if I were to sit down and read through everything that I've written, my Bangla novels, my English novels, my short stories, and all of that, I think the theme that comes through in my mind as a reader is compassion. Okay, is compassion. That invariably my sympathies, authors always show their hands, however much they try to conceal them. The authors always show their proclivities in their writing. They show their hands somewhere or the other. And the hand that I show in my writing is first of all, my deep sympathy for the dispossessed. People who haven't had it as good as we've had in this world and others have in this world. And the notion of compassion, which to me is the most stellar human quality that we can inculcate in others, in ourselves and in others. If I can be compassionate, okay, and lead a whole life, a compassionate life, then I think I've done well. And I think that sort of comes through in some measure or the other, not in a didactic way, not in a way that I'm prescribing something, but I hope that sort of comes through in some way in my writing.
So I would like to ask that, you've written in English, you've written in Bengali, and so many Indian authors are now writing in English. So do you think that as Indians, we write better in English, or we should, we'll be able to write better in our own mother tongue, whichever language is our first language? So according to you, which do you write better in? Is it English or Bengali?
Look, that's for readers to judge. I wouldn't even dream of judging whether I've been able to write anything of value in any language. But you write in the language that you wish to write, that you feel most comfortable writing. And English is an Indian language. I mean, more English is read, spoken, and used in India than in the whole of the United Kingdom, than the whole of the United States of America, in Australia, in New Zealand, in South Africa, in Singapore, name it. Okay, so it is an Indian language in many ways. Why did I write in Bangla? I mean, I think that's something which I may want to say a word or two about. I had the great good fortune growing up in Kolkata at the time that I did, and in the household that I did. My mother was a well-known author, novelist in Bangla, and my father was an independent publisher. You see all these books behind me. I'm in my Kolkata home right now because I couldn't return to Oxford as a result of the travel bans and the pandemic. So I'm operating out of here for the moment. So I was very fortunate that I developed a love for both the languages. And I felt that I didn't have to choose between them, okay? I didn't go to a missionary school. I went to an English medium school in Kolkata, where we had fantastic English teachers and fantastic Bengali teachers, okay? So I felt that I could jump from one stream to another stream without seeking anybody's permission, okay? I didn't feel any diffidence when I wrote my first novel, and the first many novels, in English. But I've always kept on asking myself that if I'm really a bilingual person in a literary sense, not simply a speaking and a reading and understanding sense, why haven't I written a novel in Bangla? Okay, and it kept bugging me. I mean, I tell people that we Indians are very bilingual. We are bilingual in a literary sense. Not simply Bengalis, but people, Indians of many different cultural contexts can speak their mother tongues, write in their mother tongues, enjoy literature in their mother tongues, as well as in English. Okay, but I haven't written a book in Bangla. And then when I did, I felt that yes, I mean, I can also call this my literary home, Bengali my literary home, and I wrote 4 novels on a trot in Bangla. My agent in England became very suspicious of me. I said, "So Kunal, have you given up writing in English?" I said, "No, I haven't given up." And then I wrote a few novels. My novel, which is now with publishers, the new novel, which hasn't been published, is also in English after Sarojini's mother.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we have 2 comments here. I think one has been answered. So there's Vinita. She said he would like to know more about the opium clerk and the opium trade in British India and the process of research of the novel. I think we've already discussed that. And then we have Ashish Kolakar, who's saying that He's spellbound by the storyteller Kunal Basu, and he hasn't read any of his books, but will do so now, and he's very impressed. So these are two comments that have been coming in from the audience. And we don't have much time. I'll ask you some very short kind of, maybe rapid fire kind of questions. You can give one word, two word answers.
Sure.
So let me ask you, amongst your own books, which one is your favorite?
Very hard to answer that.
I know, like choosing your favorite child.
Yeah, if you have multiple kids, it's very hard. But I'll tell you this, that in our lives as writers, there are many disappointments. Okay, in life, you can't have a life without disappointments, right? Everybody has disappointments. But when I'm disappointed strongly about something, I go back and read The Miniaturist. And somehow it calms me down. It gives me comfort.
So we would take the answer as Miniaturist.
Yeah, well.
And well, I don't know whether the answer is what we expect, but which is the city that you love the most?
Oh, very, very hard question, because, I am promiscuous when it comes to travel. I love travel. I've lived in many different cities in this world, and I hope I would live in many more. For example, Mumbai. I absolutely love Mumbai, and I wish that I had some kind of job there or something to do there, which will give me reason to live in Mumbai, but I haven't had so far. My relationship with Kolkata, I don't know about Shumit, is much more of a love-hate kind of a thing. Okay, there's some parts of this city which completely jolts me, and there's some parts that energize me. I love Oxford on a sunny day. I tell my friends that when the sun is shining, there are few cities in the world more pretty than Oxford. Unfortunately, the sun doesn't shine too much. Okay, I've spent a lot of time living in New York City, which for me is one of my favorite cities. Okay, and things like that. So, is there one? No, but I hope throughout 1 year I get a chance to go and visit and spend some time in some of my favorite cities.
So do these cities feature in your books, any of your favorite cities? Or
some of them do. Kolkata does, for example. I've not written an Oxford novel, and which may come at some point, because I'm waiting for a story to come into my head. And if it does, I will write. But a story set in China, stories set in London. Racist is set in part in London. Stories set in many different parts of the world. Yeah.
so another question is that, if you had to make another movie of one of your novels, which would be the filmmaker you would like to work with?
Oh, there's some very, very good filmmakers in this country, and quite a few of them. I really like the work of many young directors who are in Mumbai now, who are making very significant films. I don't want to take names because 3 of my novels are currently under option in Mumbai.
Okay.
So I don't think I want to tip the scale by mentioning the director's name, but so watch this space. There may be something else coming down soon.
Completely understandable.
Yeah.
So if not a professor and an author, what would you have been?
An artist, no question. I didn't want to be an author. I didn't want to be an academic. My love as a child growing up was art, visual art. I had my first solo exhibition when I was 13. And then stupidity stuck. Okay, I did not pursue a career in fine art, which I should have. I should have gone to art school. And I meander, like many young people of my generation. So kids of today's generation have much more information. They're focused. They've got mentors. People can advise them. When we were growing up, we were kind of all over the place. Okay, some of us had a better idea of what they wanted to do. I certainly did not. So I was a theater actor, acted in cinema, I acted in 2 of Mrinal Sen's films. I was a journalist, worked in advertising, was an engineer, worked for the space program in NASA in the US. So I was all over the place. But my first love, definitely the art.
So do you still dabble? Do you still do?
No, I don't dabble, but if you look into my website, you will see that I've come back to art. And I never wanted to be a Sunday painter or a Sunday writer. So, but in the last couple of years, my mind has come back to art. And I'm devoting a lot more time to art. And hopefully in a year to year and a half, I should be able to exhibit.
So this is a bit of a personal question. The fact is, you've lived in so many cities and, you belong to so many cultures. So what's your favorite food?
Oh, we are foodies. Both Shushmit and I, we both love to cook. And we do all kinds of stuff with food. Look, I will have a hearty Chinese meal any day. I'll have a hearty Middle Eastern meal any day. I'll have Southern American cuisine any day. I'll have Italian any day. I love the Northwest Frontier Indian cuisine, the Kerala cuisine. So there's so many. Is there a comfort food? The better way for me to answer this is, for me, is there a comfort food? This is where I think socializing is so early socialization in life is important. If I've been on the road for a long time, let's say, and I've come home and I want to cook something, or Shushmit and I want to cook something, I'll probably have a simple meal of rice, lentils, and fish curry.
So you're basically back to Bengali food. I was wondering you hadn't mentioned any Bengali food.
But only as comfort food. But we're experimental. I think I don't know what tonight we are cooking. It might be Italian. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Chinese food is almost Calcutta food,
Yeah, Calcutta Chinese is much better than Chinese. I
agree. I completely agree about that. So last question now. It's not really a question. Tell us something about yourself that not too many people know.
What, myself? Gosh, after so many interviews and things like that.
I hope your wife and your family is hearing this and it's something they don't know.
Oh, no, they do know. They do know. Not too many secrets here. What is it that people don't know? People don't know that I'm an avid cricket fan. And I'm very upset today because India has played very poorly and they will probably lose this test match. And when in England, when India plays Australia, because of the time difference, I will set the alarm and wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and make myself a cup of coffee and sit in front of the television screen and shout if India is playing well and screen obscenities if India is playing badly. So I'm very much a cricket addict. Not a lot of people in the literary cultural space know that, but yeah, I'm very much into cricket.
So that's quite a Bengali characteristic. I would have also said football, but cricket is cricket more than good enough.
Yeah.
When you look back on your life, are there any regrets? Or are you the type who doesn't believe in having regrets?
Shumit, my life is full of regrets. There's a glib phrase that people use. I've heard a lot of people use saying, I have no regrets. Okay. And it always makes me wonder because my life is full of regrets. I wish I had studied art. I wish I hadn't studied engineering. 2 degrees in engineering, not 1. I wish I hadn't done a PhD in management. I wish I hadn't been an academic and I'd been a painter or a writer from a very early stage of my life. Maybe an actor. Pursued. I was getting roles in cinema after I came back from the US after my master's. I acted with Utpal Dotto in People's Little Theatre. And I did not pursue them for all kinds of reasons which today are very flimsy to me. I wish I'd done that. That would have made my life even more fulfilling. Life is somewhat fulfilling now, but it would have made life even more fulfilling. I would not necessarily gravitate to some creature comforts, which a comfortable academic job has provided to me. So yeah, there are many regrets.
Correct. Life without regrets would be a very shallow, artificial life.
Yeah.
So we have a comment from Keshav Chandra, who's former railway board member. He says, Kunal, I fully endorse your viewpoint of with regard to racism in Britain versus racism elsewhere. In Britain, it's subtle because Britishers, notwithstanding their humorous and rowdy outlook, are basically very deep, whereas it's more open and transparent and often crude elsewhere in other because in sync with their personalities. So he's agreeing with you on that.
In fact, I agree. It can be very brutal in the United Kingdom also, but to be brutal in a very subtle way.
Some people say that Indians are the worst racists in the world. Do you have
We
any-
are. We are a society full of prejudices. I mean, it's not necessarily on race, but on caste, on religion, on all kinds of divisions. I mean, we are a very prejudiced lot, and I wish we weren't. My speak about here, which is in the process of publication, addresses prejudice head on in our society. And it pains me because I didn't grow up in an India where prejudice was front and center. Prejudice is front and center in our society now in many ways. Yeah.
So I think our time is up, and it's been a very interesting session. I would like to really thank Sumit and Kunal. It's been very interesting talking to you, and I'm going to actually read more of your books. I have not read too many, maybe two, but I'm going to pick up a few more. Especially Racist is really something that I've been looking forward to reading now.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Raghav.
So,
Thank you very much, Kunal. Am I audible?
yes, you are.
Okay. So it was absolutely mesmerizing. It's very rare to come across such a detailed, and thanks to Zoom, you came across very close up, like various other physical festivals where you can barely hear the speaker. So you were very, very clear, very, very convincing, and especially your thoughts about human relationships being the most important thing in literature and in stories, and your own thoughts about human feelings, compassion. And there was one particular thought which hadn't ever struck me, but which you delineated very, very accurately, and about the fact that novels don't have to really be absolutely copied story-wise in cinema, and both can have their own zones of fidelity, and that's a very thought-provoking thing. And I'm trying to agree with you that once an author has written a book, it really belongs to society and belongs to the public, and it's for them to interpret it. So really, when you ask someone for an explanation to your story, it's only an explanation. It cannot be the explanation. So thank you very much, Kunal. Absolutely scintillating. Thank you, Atima. You and Shumit made it extremely exciting and very, very provocative and interesting. Thank you very much from all of us at the Bhopal Literature.
I'll just make one final comment. I have an additional regret, and the regret is when I was invited to this literary festival, I said, "Oh, Bhopal, I've never been there. I would love to go there." Okay, so if this festival was being held in person, then I would definitely shown up, and I would love to have gone to Bhopal, but maybe some other time.
Absolutely, Kunal. We'd be delighted to have you over some another time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Bye now.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day. Have a great evening. Time differences.
I'd like to thank all our panelists and the audience for joining us. Please join us tomorrow at the same time. Thank you, good night, and stay safe.